Please describe your relationship with him and how he came about being your Uncle Paul.
Interestingly enough, I have to say that I usually talk about him being in a relationship with my parents, but it really goes back further than my parents. It goes back to my grandmother, because I really forgot that my grandmother was a member of Mother Naomi Zion Church, and she was the mother of the church, very close to the Robeson family, so I have to go back to her. But my father and mother and the Robesons were always friends, even before I was born. And as you probably know, when you have parents who are close to people and consider them their best friends, then they become your uncles and aunts. Even to the extent that his brother Benjamin, who was the pastor of Mother Church, 135th Street in New York, my father and Uncle Ben resembled each other, and everybody called them the twins. So when Hildy asked me, how old were you when you got to know him? I don't remember not knowing him, because, you know, he was just in my life, all of my life. And that's why I always refer to him as Uncle Paul. His brother is Uncle Ben, and his sister, of course, is Aunt Marian. Aunt Essie, his wife. Now, we're not discussing her today, but she was probably one of the most influential women in this country that you don't know. And I hope you will look up this Londa Robeson. But she died of cancer in '65. And he then went to live with his son, Paulie, in New York City. But Paulie thought that he would be better coming to Philadelphia to live with Aunt Mary. They were a very close family. It was really Aunt Marian who guided the boys in the family. And so she was delighted, of course, to have her brother come and stay with her in Philadelphia, and he the same. He was delighted to be able to be here, taken care of by his sister. One of the things that I try to point out at the house when I'm talking to people is that people thought he came here and spent the last 10 years of his life in bed, but that is not correct. While his health had been compromised, and many of you probably don't know, that here's a man who had been one of the most popular entertainers. Let me say for you all as people of my age, I'm looking at the audience, some are younger, but for the most part, I say to my young people, who's the greatest entertainer in the world? And most of them will say Beyonce. And I'll say, well, take away all social media. I said, you can't probably imagine living in this world without social media. But I said, take that all away. And if you take it away and multiply that by 10, that's who Uncle Paul was. So he was the greatest entertainer in the world. I didn't say the United States, I didn't say Pennsylvania or New York, I said the world. One of the things that was interesting was, I'll say two things that were interesting to me. First of all, if I came in that front door and he was downstairs, he bowed to me. Let me repeat myself. When I came in the front door, Uncle Paul would get up and bow to me. Good morning, Vernoca. Good morning, Vernoca. Well, you know, as a young girl, you know, I always found it interesting, you know, because he was bowing to me. Not because of his reputation. I'm talking about just an uncle bowing to a young girl. The other thing that was always interesting to me was that he read at least 4 papers in the morning. Now, many young people don't even know that we used to have 2 major papers in Philadelphia. We had the Inquirer and we had the Bulletin. Now, you read the Inquirer in the morning and you usually read the Bulletin at night. Now, in his case, he read the Bulletin from the night before in the morning, and he read the Inquirer. But he also read 2 other papers. Now, because he was so fluent in these languages, it might be a French newspaper, it might be a German newspaper, it might be, but always 2 other newspapers. And I don't mean glancing through, I'm talking about reading the newspaper. Now, as a young girl, you know, you were a little frustrated that you had to sit there while a man read through 4 newspapers. But, you know, you couldn't say, Uncle, you hurry up, I got someplace to go. But, you know, the thing about it was, then when we got to going someplace, then I would be able to hear about what was happening in other countries. Because I couldn't read in those languages, but he did. So it was interesting from that point of view. He was a teenager going to RUTGERS, where they broke his nose when he went out for football. Of course, his father sent him back. They dislocated his shoulder. His father sent him back. They stepped on his hands and ripped out all his fingernails, and his father sent him back. So I'm talking about a man from childhood going through those kinds of things. You know, and there were other situations where we did talk about in the family what he went through because his father wanted him to have good education. So in some cases, he went to all-white schools. And it was not a comfortable situation because they didn't want him there. And so, you know, we talk about sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. Now, the names that he was called and the things that he went through, not only from the children, but the parents of the children, especially when he was in school in New Jersey, elementary school in New Jersey. It was awful. I would remind you that while you saw this big, statuesque man, to me, he was always a very gentle soul, very quiet. You know, I mean, you know, we hear this big thunderous voice, but at home, he was soft-spoken, and the relationship that he had with Aunt Marian was very good. And I want to mention somebody else because nobody mentions this. Our housekeeper, the woman was the housekeeper at our house at 4918. And 4918, like I said, it was a very large house. It was a single house on a row home. And it was a manse, or as many people know, a parsonage. And this is why the gatherings happened there. But there was Miss Savannah Morton, who was our housekeeper. And one of the things that I always admired about Uncle Paul was how he treated Miss Martin with dignity and respect. And, you know, in those days, and I recall very vividly, you know, you used to go to people's houses who had black people, white people, who you had people working for them. And you watched how they minimized them. And I always respected my parents and Uncle Paul for that. I will also tell you that I had 2 other people that we had conversations about. When I was 12 years old, I got a scholarship to go to Johnson C. Smith University. And I was the youngest student taught by W.E.B. Du Bois. And of course, that was Uncle Paul's, one of Uncle Paul's best friends at the time. And so we had an opportunity to get my perspective as a young person about W.E.B. Du Bois versus his relationship to him. And then when I was a young girl, there was a woman that we used to go to visit. We lived in Poughkeepsie, New York. And there was a young woman that we used to go visit. And I remember her becoming our babysitter. I had a sister, Margaret, so you'll hear me talk about we a lot. We didn't recognize the significance of this woman. We just thought she was a little old dried up white woman. But she was Eleanor Roosevelt. And so as I got older talking to Uncle Paul, we were able to talk about our children's relationship to this woman versus his relationship, because they were very close friends. So, you know, there were a lot of different kinds of things that we could talk about as I got older, because, of course, my recollections and maturity began to set in. And so that took on a whole different dimension.